The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows of the small Chicago apartment, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air and casting a golden glow on the walls. This was Lily's world, a fortress built not of brick and mortar, but of love and crayon drawings. Her mother, Ava, had a talent for turning scarcity into warmth. Every wall was a gallery of Lily's art. Every shelf held a smiling photo of the two of them, their faces pressed close together. The air smelled of cinnamon from the morning's oatmeal and the faint, clean scent of laundry. It was a home where every object told a story of resilience. Lily, all of 10 years old, with eyes that held the gravity of a much older soul, sat on the floor of the hallway, her worn notebook open on her lap, sketching the patterns in the scuffed hardwood. She was the quiet guardian of this peace, a child who sensed the fragility of her mother's smile and felt an unspoken duty to protect it. Her father's visits were rare, formal affairs that always felt like an intrusion of a colder, sharper world into their soft one. Mark stood in that same hallway, his expensive suit looking out of place against the cheerful, cluttered walls. He had a way of making the small apartment feel even smaller, his presence sucking the warmth from the air. He'd brought Lily, a generic-looking doll she didn't want, and had spoken to Ava in clipped, polite tones. Now, he paced by the front door, his back to Lily, his phone pressed to his ear. He thought she was in her room, lost in her own world. But Lily was a chronicler of details, and the shift in her father's voice, from the strained pleasantries he used with her to the icy, clipped tone he used on the phone, pulled her attention like a magnet. She paused her sketching, her crayon hovering over the page, and listened. The words that drifted down the hallway were not meant for her, yet they struck her with the force of a physical blow. "I don't care about the details. I need custody," her father's voice rumbled, a low and venomous thing. "My father's will is clear. The inheritance is only released to the heir who has custody of a child. The girl is the key to the money, that's it." The girl, not Lily, not his daughter, but a key. A tool. The warmth of the apartment seemed to instantly vanish, replaced by a profound, biting cold. The world tilted on its axis, and the drawings on the wall suddenly looked childish and naive. In that moment, the pain of not being loved was eclipsed by the humiliation of being used. She didn't just understand that her father didn't want her. She understood she was nothing more than an obstacle, a means to an end, a price tag on a fortune. He ended the call, turned with a plastic smile, and left with a perfunctory wave, completely oblivious to the world he had just shattered. Lily remained frozen on the floor, the crayon having snapped in her small hand. The devastating truth settled in her chest, a heavy, suffocating weight. Later that evening, the reality of her father's words took physical form. She found her mother at the kitchen table, staring at a thick, official-looking envelope. A court notice resting beside her trembling hand. Ava wasn't sobbing loudly. She was weeping in that silent, hopeless way that felt so much worse. The pieces clicked into place for Lily, forming a terrifying picture. Their love, the only thing of true value they possessed, was being put on trial. That single, heartbreaking image of her mother's despair was the beginning of everything. It's hard to watch a family's love threatened by greed. And if you believe in the power of these stories, subscribing helps us continue to share them. The silence that followed her father's departure was heavier than any sound Lily had ever known. It clung to the crayon drawings on the wall, making them seem flimsy and false. That night, she found Ava at the kitchen table, the single overhead light casting long shadows across her face. The court summons lay on the worn wood like a death sentence. Ava wasn't crying anymore. She had entered a state of hollowed-out stillness, her gaze fixed on the dense, incomprehensible legal text. Lily watched her mother's shoulders slump, the slow, quiet defeat of a good person faced with a power she couldn't match. It was the look of someone who had fought her whole life to stay afloat, only to see a tidal wave forming on the horizon, a wave made of money and lawyers and lies. Lily approached the table not as a child seeking comfort, but as a partner approaching an ally. She placed her small hand over her mother's. The contrast between her youthful skin and Ava's trembling fingers, a stark reminder of what was at stake. Ava flinched, as if waking from a nightmare, and looked at her daughter with eyes full of a sorrow so deep it threatened to drown them both. Before her mother could offer a broken apology or a false reassurance, Lily spoke, her voice steady and clear, devoid of any childish tremor. "We're going to fight," she said, the words a solemn vow in the quiet kitchen. "I'll help you." In that moment, a pact was sealed not in ink, but in shared love and a dawning, fierce resolve. The next day, Lily's world changed its axis. The school library, once a place for fantasy and adventure stories, became her war room. She bypassed the colorful children's section and navigated her way to the reference aisle, pulling down heavy, intimidating books on family law and civil procedure. The librarian watched with a curious, gentle smile, assuming it was for a school project. But Lily wasn't playing. She sat for hours, her small brow furrowed in concentration, a dictionary by her side as she painstakingly translated the dense jargon. Words like custody, jurisdiction, and precedent became her new vocabulary, each one a stone she turned over, searching for a weapon or a shield to protect her home. At night, after Ava was asleep, believing her daughter was lost in dreams, Lily would be hunched over the family's old desktop computer. The glow of the screen illuminated her determined face as she typed search queries into the engine, her small fingers moving with a newfound urgency. She read articles, scanned legal forums for parents, and devoured stories of custody battles, absorbing the patterns of argument and the language of the court. She was building an arsenal of knowledge, piece by painful piece. Her notebook, once filled with sketches of birds and trees, now held flowcharts of legal processes and lists of statutes she barely understood but knew, instinctively, were important. It was a lonely, silent crusade waged in the quiet hours of the night. For Ava, watching this transformation was a source of both profound pride and a deep, gnawing guilt. She saw her daughter, who should have been worrying about homework and sleepovers, carrying a burden far too heavy for her small frame. There were dark circles under Lily's eyes, and her usual playful energy was replaced by a quiet, intense focus. Ava would find legal pads with Lily's neat, careful handwriting next to her bed, filled with notes that made her own heart ache. She was witnessing her child sacrifice her own childhood to save their family, and the gratitude she felt was inextricably tangled with the painful wish that none of it was necessary, that she could simply be a mother protecting her daughter, not the other way around. The outside world began to intrude, its cold bureaucracy a stark contrast to their home's warmth. A social worker, a woman with a practiced, impersonal smile and a clipboard, came to visit. She walked through their small apartment, her eyes cataloguing every scuff on the floor, every mismatched piece of furniture. Her questions were a minefield of implications. Does Lily have her own room? Does she get enough structured playtime? Are you able to provide for all her needs on a teacher's salary? Each query was a subtle jab, a seed of doubt planted to suggest that love wasn't enough, that their life was a measure of deficiencies. Ava answered with quiet dignity, but she felt the walls of her carefully built sanctuary being judged, measured, and found wanting. The pressure mounted when a thick envelope arrived from Mark's legal team. It was filled with formal declarations and thinly veiled accusations, painting Ava as an emotionally unstable and financially irresponsible parent. The language was deliberately cruel, designed to overwhelm and intimidate. It spoke of her modest income as a failure and her unstructured home environment as a detriment to Lily's development. For Ava, each sentence was a blow, twisting her greatest strengths, her resilience, her creativity in the face of scarcity, into weaknesses. She felt herself shrinking under the weight of the assault, the formal, printed words feeling more powerful and true than her own lived experience. The legal system felt like a great, grinding machine, and she was being fed into it. But for Lily, the lawyer's attacks were not just threats, they were clues. Hidden within the dense paragraphs of legal speak, she found the phrase that would become her guiding star: the best interest of the child. It was repeated over and over, a legal mantra she latched onto with ferocious intensity. This, she realized, was the heart of the entire battle. It wasn't about the size of the house or the balance in a bank account. It was about her well-being, her happiness. This single legal principle gave her a foothold, a place to stand and fight back. It's amazing how a single determined heart can find a ray of hope in the darkest of places. If you believe that one person's courage can make a difference, subscribing is a way to help us keep sharing these powerful journeys. Their evenings transformed into strategy sessions at the kitchen table. Ava, exhausted after a long day of teaching, would spread the legal documents out, her face a mask of confusion and despair. Lily would sit beside her, her notebook open, patiently pointing to a sentence or a clause. "This part here," Lily would explain, her small finger tracing the words. "It says they have to prove Dad's house is better for me. Not just richer, Mom, better." She broke down the complex arguments into simple truths, her clarity cutting through the fog of Ava's fear. They were no longer just mother and child. They were a team, a two-person army preparing for the fight of their lives against a force that seemed insurmountable. One night, as they pored over a particularly nasty motion filed by Mark's lawyer, Ava finally broke down. "I don't know how to do this, Lily," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They make it sound like loving you isn't enough." Lily looked up from her notes, her large, serious eyes meeting her mother's. "They're wrong," she said with a firmness that belied her age. "Love is the only thing that is enough. We just have to make the judge see that. We have to show him our home, not just with pictures, but with the truth." Her words were a lifeline, pulling Ava back from the edge of surrender and reminding her what they were truly fighting for. The strain of Lily's secret mission began to show. At school, she'd stare out the window during class, her mind miles away, running through legal arguments instead of multiplication tables. Her friends' chatter about cartoons and games seemed to come from another world, one she no longer fully inhabited. She was an old soul in a young body, carrying the weight of adult fears. The nightmares started soon after, vivid and terrifying dreams where she was lost in a cold, empty mansion, calling for her mother but hearing no answer. She would wake up in a cold sweat, the phantom chill of her father's world clinging to her, a stark reminder of the future he was trying to build for her. The official notice arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, a stark white envelope that seemed to suck all the color from the room. The custody hearing was scheduled for a date just a few weeks away. The reality of it was a punch to the gut for Ava, a final, terrifying countdown. Mark's lawyers had escalated their campaign, contacting the school to inquire about Lily's recent distraction and emotional state, a clear tactic to build their case of a volatile home life. The battle was no longer a distant threat confined to paper. It was here, knocking on their door, threatening to break it down and tear their world apart. Time was running out, and the day of reckoning was fast approaching. The courtroom was a sterile, wood-paneled box, smelling faintly of old paper and anxiety. It was designed to strip away emotion, to reduce life to a series of facts and statutes. On the witness stand, Ava looked small and fragile, a wildflower being systematically dissected under the harsh fluorescent lights. Mark's lawyer, a man with a sharp suit and an even sharper voice, moved with the predatory grace of a shark. He twisted her love into overprotectiveness, her modest income into neglect, and her vibrant, happy home into an unstable environment. Each question was a carefully aimed dart, and with every answer, Ava seemed to shrink a little more. The judge, a man with a weary face, listened impassively, his pen scratching notes that felt like the etching of their fate. Lily sat beside their overwhelmed public defender, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white, watching the methodical destruction of her mother. Just as the lawyer finished his brutal cross-examination, and a heavy sense of defeat settled over the room, a quiet murmur rippled from the back. The court-appointed psychologist, who had spoken with Lily earlier, leaned forward and whispered to the bailiff. The bailiff approached the bench, his expression unreadable. The judge listened, his eyebrows raising slightly. He looked down from his elevated perch, his gaze landing on the small, determined girl sitting at the defense table. After a moment of consideration that felt like an eternity, he nodded slowly. "The court will hear from the child," he announced, his voice echoing in the stunned silence. A current of shock passed through the room. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. Ava looked at her daughter, a mixture of terror and awe in her eyes, as Lily stood up from her chair. Lily didn't walk to the witness stand. She stood where she was, a small, solitary figure who suddenly seemed to command the entire space. Her voice, when she spoke, was not the high-pitched plea of a child, but the clear, steady tone of someone presenting irrefutable evidence. "Your Honor," she began, her eyes fixed on the judge, "the law says the court has to consider what's in the best interest of the child." She paused, letting the legal phrase hang in the air, the very words she had clung to for weeks. Then she turned her head slowly, her large, serious eyes finding her father's across the room. "Dad," she asked, her voice devoid of anger, filled only with a profound, aching clarity. "In the last 365 days, how many times did you call just to ask how I was doing? Not about the visits, not about schedules, just to ask about me." The question landed with the force of a physical blow. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the hum of the overhead lights. She didn't wait for an answer he couldn't give. She continued, her voice gaining strength. "I remember it was 4 times, and 2 of those times you had to hang up early." Then she looked back at the judge, her small face a portrait of solemn truth. "A few weeks ago, I heard him on the phone in our hallway. He told his lawyer he needed custody because of my grandfather's will. He said, 'The girl is the key to the money, that's it.'" She repeated the words that had shattered her world, not with tears, but with a chilling finality. It takes an incredible spirit to face such a painful truth and use it not as a weapon of revenge, but as a shield for the one you love. If these stories of quiet strength resonate with you, subscribing helps us continue to be a voice for them. Watching her daughter stand tall, speaking truth to power with a courage she herself had lost, was like watching the sun break through the darkest storm clouds. A fire ignited in Ava's chest, burning away the fear, the shame, and the intimidation. She rose to her feet, her posture suddenly straight and unwavering. "Your Honor," she said, her voice ringing with a conviction that startled everyone, including herself. "Everything my daughter has just told you is the absolute truth." She no longer looked like a victim, she looked like a mother. She spoke not of her financial struggles, but of reading bedtime stories every night. She spoke not of their small apartment, but of the fortress of love they had built within its walls. For the first time, she wasn't just defending herself. She was fighting for her family, standing side by side with her small, fierce warrior, their combined strength a force more powerful than any legal argument or financial statement. The judge's gavel came down not with a crack, but with a soft, definitive thud that seemed to absorb all the tension in the room. He looked down from the bench, his gaze bypassing the lawyers and landing squarely on Mark. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of the law and a deep, human disappointment. He spoke of the sacred trust of parenthood, a bond that could not be measured in square footage or bank statements. He denied the custody request, but his ruling was more than a legal decision. It was a moral indictment. He admonished Mark for attempting to use his child as a pawn in a grotesque game of inheritance. A failure of fatherhood so profound it left a chilling silence in its wake. There were no cheers, no triumphant cries. There was only the quiet, profound relief of a storm that had finally passed. As Ava wrapped her arms around Lily, holding her not as a child she had saved, but as the hero who had saved them both. The victory in court was a closing chapter, but it was also the first page of a new one. Ava found that the fire Lily had ignited within her refused to be extinguished. She was no longer content to simply be a survivor. She wanted to be a defender. That fall, she enrolled in night classes at the local community college. Her worn teacher's tote bag now filled with heavy textbooks on legal ethics and civil procedure. She was studying to become a paralegal. The woman who had once been terrified by the language of the law was now determined to master it, not for revenge, but to become a guide for other families lost in the same terrifying maze. She was driven by a new philosophy, forged in that courtroom, that true justice wasn't something you were given, but something you fought for with courage, knowledge, and a love so fierce it could stare down any power. Lily returned to her childhood, but she was not the same. She carried the knowledge of her battle not as a scar, but as a badge of honor. As a preteen, she noticed other kids struggling with their own quiet injustices, divorces, bullies, feelings of powerlessness. So she started something small, a study group in the school library she called the Justice League, a playful name for a serious purpose. She used simple stories and drawings to explain basic rights to other kids, teaching them that their voices mattered, that they had a right to be safe and heard. It was her way of turning her own pain into a shield for others. Seeing a child find their strength and use it to lift up those around them is a powerful reminder of what we're all capable of. Sharing these stories is only possible with your support, and subscribing ensures we can continue to give a voice to the quiet heroes. 15 years later, the echo of that courtroom had shaped a legacy. Lily, now 25 and a recent graduate from law school, stood outside a similar wood-paneled room, her briefcase in hand. She smoothed the lapels of her suit, her expression a mixture of nervous energy and the same quiet determination she'd had as a child. Her first official case was defending a single mother in a custody battle against a wealthy, influential ex-husband. By her side, organizing files with an expert's calm, was her greatest inspiration and her lead paralegal, Ava. Her mother's smile was no longer fragile. It was forged in strength and pride. Before pushing the door open, they shared a look, a silent acknowledgement of the long road they had traveled and the promise of the fight to come. Justice, for them, was no longer just a concept, it was their family's work.